Good afternoon. As you're watching this, it means you still have enough tech left to at least do that. And I'm assuming that you have enough freedom left to be able to watch something like this because I'm assuming that freedoms are severely curtailed in at least some areas and you've managed to escape whatever areas those happen to be. Good for you. Also, I'm assuming that things in this time, your time, have fallen apart enough that my making these statements makes perfect sense. And I'm actually hoping that I'm wrong and it doesn't turn out the way I envision it. It's hard for any of us nowadays not to feel that things are going to be vastly different in your time, and depending on whether you tend to lean left or right, what you view as things being vastly different are going to be vastly different. So I tend to lean left, and I believe in climate change. And when it comes to things like chemicals in the environment that are actually changing our internal chemistry, that's not even up for debate. We can measure those. We can measure those in the environment. We can measure those in our bodies. We know this stuff is out there. We know this stuff is in here. We know it is affecting us. The problem with that, though, is it doesn't matter how much evidence you have to bring to the table concerning stuff like that. People on the right just don't want to accept that notion because that means capitalism is causing some of the problems that they are very adamant about as being very detrimental to our society, like low testosterone levels. Well, they haven't brought up, well, they have to a degree, falling reproduction rates, which they use in their argument of replacement theory. In other words, get to work, white people, start making more babies. Fine. Shut down your fucking capitalism and allow our reproductive systems to heal. They don't want to hear that. I'm sure you're aware of the significance of the date I chose, December 7th, 2041. That's 100 years after the attack on the U.S. and our involvement thereafter in World War II and everything that came after that, the thing that actually made us a superpower. And, well, we ramped up manufacturing in order to meet war requirements, as did most, if not all, other industrialized nations. And even the ones that were fighting against us after the war, they still had much of their industrial infrastructure in place and were able to quickly just go right on with business as usual, or actually business as expanded by not only just increasing manufacturing in terms of just sheer production prowess, but everything we learned during the war. I mean, for Pete's sakes, we certainly have an atomic bomb by now, but because of the war, we had an atomic bomb within like 4 years. It was the most productive and the most destructive in all of human history. The most productive part of that ended at least a couple of decades ago on our part, to a great extent, because we gave away much of manufacturing to other countries that either had sweatshops or at least just cheaper labor that they could offer. And another thing that happened, and this was just quite recently, but with the pandemic, with all these people spending all that time at home, and with all the videos of how much nature was beginning to come back right onto city streets, foxes and deer and goats and all kinds of animals just wandering the streets like they hadn't been able to do for centuries. People were seeing that. People were seeing how much damage we had done and how quickly it could begin to reclaim if we just backed off. And I think that, on top of the grievous mishandling of the pandemic, I mean, it was just such a botched job when it shouldn't have been that way. And people having the time off and being able to reflect and maybe realizing with this time off how precious the moments in their life were and how wasted they were spending them in these factories or these sales rooms or these cubicles or wherever, but just going to a job they didn't like, no matter how much money they were making. And in a lot of cases, they weren't making much money at all. So there was all of that going on. But a huge factor also was while all non-essential workers were just in shutdown, in lockdown for quite a while, even after that, many people were still working from home. And people weren't going out, people weren't spending a lot of money. And yet, even with all that, even with all the people who just weren't working or were working from home and not going out and spending money, the billionaires were raking in more billions than we could just even conceivably imagine. It was incomprehensible. People were staying at home and not making money. And the richest of the rich were raking in money hand over fist. And not only that, but we also saw through a couple of events that happened on the internet how much the market was rigged by all these big players and how it was rigged against anybody without a lot of money to enter the market in a big way. In other words, just like outside of the market, inside of the market, the rich get richer and all the rest, they're struggling under a different set of rules. And we saw that with the stock market, and we saw that with precious metals. And all of these things add up to what we call capitalism anyways, although we know it's not capitalism. It's this carnival freak show of an economic system we euphemistically call capitalism, but we saw that this is not working. This is just not working. It's destroying the planet's ability to sustain not just human life, but all life. It's destroying people's souls by just having to go to work at these companies where they're just not getting compensated enough to be in a place that they don't want to be in for a third of their life. And we had seen this going on for decades anyways, that, CEOs could come into a company, lose money, even bankrupt the company, get this huge golden parachute or pension or whatever was the phrase of the day, their compensation for doing something that anybody beneath them would instantly get fired for. I know any job that I've ever had, if I went in and did to the company what any of these CEOs had done, I would be fired on the spot. And if they could take away my last paycheck, they would do everything they could to do that. I know because that's happened, well, let's say 1.5 times, 2 times more or less, but this is not about me. The thing is, we see these rich getting away with these white-collar crimes that in terms of social upheaval, are worse than murder. And they not only don't even get a slap on the wrist, they get compensated for it. They get rewarded for doing the most dastardly things in what's supposed to be this capitalist society where you've got this competition and the free hand of the market, and that decides who wins and who loses, but that's not how it works. First of all, as soon as you introduce subsidies and bailouts and all the other forms of corporate welfare, right there, the playing field is now tilted. And that's the way it's always been, but it's getting worse, and everybody knows it now. It's like an open secret. We know how corrupt the system is. And by the system, I mean the system in every aspect and at every level. It's just corrupt, and we know that. So, having said all that, on top of just the economic detriments that they foist upon us, all the pollution. I mean, forget the money. You can actually live without money. You can't live without air, water, and food. And they are destroying those things also. But here in this time, we've just learned recently that there is a list, and that those who engage in wasting bandwidth are on the list. The more bandwidth they waste, the higher up the list they go. And it's probably not confined to just one list. There's probably a few shady organizations out there keeping lists. But you know, if you're taking water from public lands and then selling it, you're probably on the list. If you've known about climate change for decades now and have been hiding it from the public so you can continue business as usual, you're on the list. If you're gobbling up farmland because you're rich and you can do that and you can keep it from people who actually need it and can use it, you're on the list. If you're buying underground bunkers, you're on the list. I mean, I don't know exactly what the parameters are, what the requirements are to get on the list or move up the list. Everybody's idea of what wasting bandwidth means is going to be different. But I know people have this idea at this time. So 20 years from now, I can imagine that that whole movement has grown. I'm going to be real interested to find out, if I make it that long, what's going down, because the people who think they're just getting away with this and they can do it forever because money will protect them, I want to know if they got their comeuppance. We'll see. But given that period of increased productivity, we went from vanquishing our adversaries abroad to attacking ourselves from within in three very significant ways: biologically, socially, and economically. The toxins and trash we've corrupted our environments with are killing us. Mercury-laden fish, pesticides and microplastics-laden food, water, and air, carbon and methane emissions are just some of the ways we're now shortening lifespans and decimating other species and inhibiting our ability to reproduce, and they're also helping to change the world's climate. Nobody knows what societal collapse will look like, or even if it actually happens, so it certainly seems to be definitely on track of the 1973 MIT study that said it's going to happen around 2040. So, of course, I'm hoping that it won't happen. I have little faith that we're going to find the ways and means to evade societal collapse. I just see all of the indicators there that it's already started. It's taking place. A lot of other people see this also. A lot of other people can't see it because it's incremental, and they see this as like the zombie apocalypse. You know, they wake up one morning and the whole world has changed. And those of us who are intellectually sophisticated enough to understand these things, because we've watched other societies, not watched like actually watched on YouTube, but watched like, we can read books. We know how these societies have collapsed, and none of it happened overnight. So we can see we're going down the same path. Well, for example, Rome, bread and circuses. We are absolutely practicing that right now. We've just begun practicing that. And it's so easy to see how closely we are paralleling just what the Romans did economically, that we're going down the same exact path they did. And they didn't have to be concerned about things like, for example, all the destruction we've done to environments, all the toxins out there that are going in here, climate change, the fact that our political system, which is just starting to crumble, and I mean there were signs of it. There were signs of it not being that sturdy to begin with, and there were signs of everything that I've mentioned concerning currency and the economy, for example, going back to Nixon. He took us off the gold standard. There were people then that were screaming, this is insane. This is going to destroy us. And since it didn't, like overnight, everybody thought, oh, it turned out all right. What were they talking about? Well, sometimes these things take a little while. But enough about these times. This was this was supposed to mostly be about you in your era and what you're dealing with. And I'm hoping that I'll make it there so I may be part of the solution, whatever that ends up looking like. And that's going to depend a great deal, if not entirely, on just how the whole thing starts to crumble and how bad it gets, and what the people of that day are like, and what resources we have to contend with what's going to be a bloody mess. But the reason, partly anyways, that I chose this date is that I think it's significant that we declared war on Japan and Germany and entered that war, a relatively minor player on the world stage at that point, and over the course of a few years became the superpower, and to a great extent have been patting ourselves on the back ever since. But the thing about the people who entered that war, they were just coming off of the Great Depression to begin with. So they had been through those hard times, and then they went through the war, which was a lot of rationing, or actually, being overseas and fighting, which were those hard times. And afterwards started to build this country into the military and economic powerhouse that it became. So the events that shaped the people who built the country afterwards, the Depression and the war, those were huge factors in the character and the fortitude that the people after the war exhibited. And that is what you're going to have. We're just starting these noble evil times. And what we're going to be dealing with is going to shape you. And while unfortunately that's going to mean a hell of a lot of hardship, it's also going to be a kind of training ground where you learn to build a better world on the other end because you're now that much stronger. And it's going to be tough because it very much looks like economic collapse, environmental degradation of the kind that we have not even seen yet, and we've seen a lot of it already. Probably the end of this government and many other governments around the world as we now know them. And on top of however hard it may be to raise children, as it were, in your period, there's going to be less of them to raise, given the fact that sperm count's going down, testosterone levels are going down, penis sizes are shrinking, the taint measurement is shrinking. This carnival freak show of an economic system we euphemistically call capitalism is destroying us. And you are going to be the ones who suffer the brunt of that degradation and destruction. The silver lining in all of this is with this just retarded system that we're using right now. And it doesn't matter whether you're talking about the economy, politics, industry, whatever. Anything you refer to, given these times here, it's part of a retarded system. Much of that will be gone. You'll be starting from scratch. With the dollar gone, I'm assuming by then, it actually is going to be free market capitalism now, because you're going to be trading goods and services, and there won't be dollars and banks and the Federal Reserve and the government shuffling this money around in a kind of sinister, underhanded game, dictating winners or losers. You're all going to be starting on a much more level playing field, and given that, and knowing what things are like now and what they have been for, I wouldn't say time immemorial, but at least since civilization started agriculture, started living in towns and cities, and having these concrete forms of government. Throughout all of that, it has been a mess. And it's your job unfortunately, but hopefully you have the chops to accomplish it because of the hard times you've been through. It's your job to restore the environment, to clean up the stuff that's messing up our reproductive systems, and to get rid of the big governments that just destroy societies, as opposed to building societies where communities and individuals flourish. This protecting the rich and the elite, making everyone else do all the dirty work, all the hard work, and pretending to represent those people when in fact you're not doing that at all, and you're only getting elected because you've got the money and you've got the renown, the advertising, the ability to be on everybody's screen all the time so everybody knows who you are and doesn't give anybody who can actually step into those positions and be a real public servant, because they're unknowns. You're going to have to get rid of all that for good, forever. Look at where you're at. Look at what you've got to do. Look at the migrating bands. Look at the extreme weather. Look at how industry has just toppled because people don't want to work for these other people anymore, because transport systems are screwed up because of a pandemic that we had all of the ability to contain and didn't, because of extreme weather events that we had all of the ability to change our ways and didn't because it was hard. All of that stuff. You can see where all this came from. You can see right here where I'm sitting where it more or less started. It started way before when I sat down in this chair for this video, but we'll use this as a starting point because you've got to start somewhere. Just given the ex-president, how politics has turned totally like a circus act, a freaking clown show, how the environment is obviously screwed up to anybody who would pause and look for long enough and really consider that we could fix this if we just change this capitalist system that's already broke anyways. But there are too many who don't want to do that. There are too many who don't want to admit that our industry is polluting our bodies, and that's why reproduction rates are going down. They want to blame it on God knows what. They have so many freaky theories out there that I don't even want to go through it. I'm sure by the time this gets to you, there's going to be 100 more that are even worse than what we have. But that's what you have to deal with. Hopefully, most of those people are just deranged enough that when things start to crumble, they're just not going to make it. Because there are going to be people in your midst that you have to figure out, what do we do with these people? Jails and prisons, well, you're not going to have jails and prisons in those times anyways, I'm assuming. But even if you do, it's just way too costly, energy-wise, all things wise. You can't be locking people up. You either have to turn them out or you have to eliminate them. And you're going to have to figure that out. But there are going to be people who want to take control, who want to call themselves alpha males, or just are some kind of nerds who think they have a better way and want to be powerful and in control and have resources you don't have, and all of the stuff that we're dealing with now. There's going to be stupidity in your time, just like there is in all times, and you're going to have to figure out how to deal with it. And it's going to be hard to be getting rid of people, whether it's just turning them out or any other method you've chosen, given that the population is going down, and with societal collapse, God only knows how many people go by the wayside during that. But you're going to have to figure these things out, because you got to revegetate the planet. You got to bring the carbon and the methane down. And I'm quite sure that given how much we know about it now, you'll have even better methods of doing that. But that takes power. So you're always going to have power. And you can't be spending it on stupid things like the internet and phones and God knows how many toys we have that run on electricity this day and age. But there you go. I just wanted to give you the message that many of us see what's coming down the pike. And knowing that the population would be going down sooner or later, even before we knew about the nasty chemicals that are in our environment that are messing up our reproductive systems. going back to 1973 when MIT had much less information about how screwed up things are. And they said, yeah, population is going to be going down about 2036 and there's going to be societal collapse about 2040. They didn't know about climate change. They didn't know we were going to have this pandemic and the response was going to be like a busload of squirrels trying to figure out an oak tree. I don't even know the appropriate metaphor. There's nothing stupid and crazy enough to describe what we have just been through. This election, which obviously signals the beginning of the end of this great republic. But given all these things I've just mentioned, on top of everything they knew back in 1973, it's almost a given. These are the end times for what we have ostensibly enjoyed over the last couple of hundred years of the industrial and information age. But there are those in this time who see what's coming down the pike, and we realize what it's going to be like, at least in theory, for you, if not in specifics. And we feel bad because there's nothing we can do to change it. So I just wanted to relay a message to you. I hope I'm still around, that we can meet in person then and try to figure this whole thing out, because it's going to be very ugly. But I just wanted to let you know there are people here who feel very deeply, very concerned about what you're going to have to deal with. And we're with you in spirit, if not in body. Good luck. And I'd just like to end this like I always do. I thank you for watching, and if you didn't watch, what's wrong with you, man? And remember, summer is coming. This one will be long. Gird your loins.